In this lesson we're going to look at the very beginning of setting up a drawing. So before we start any drawing, we should always ensure that we're working with the correct unit measurements that we want to work with. In the case of my tutorials, I'm going to be working in metric and particularly millimeters. So what we need to do is open a command to open a certain box where we can make those settings called units. So the best way to do that is using the command prompt. Is either type the letters UN, then press space or enter, and that'll bring up our drawing units window. Now, as you can see here, we have a few different drop-down boxes. This top left here where it says length, that's the main measurements that we'd be working in. So I'll be working in decimal. If you're working in feet and inches, generally architectural or engineering would be the selection. If you just highlight your mouse just over the box, you can see that a pop-up window comes up for a tip of what each one of these categories is for. So if you ever get a bit lost about which one you need, you can look at that. Generally speaking, once we've set this unit thing, we won't touch it again, and we will get onto later on in a later lesson about setting up a drawing template. So once it's set, we can just reuse the same template over and over again, and we don't need to set things up again. The drop down box below it is the precision. So basically working with decimal, for instance, I might have a 10 millimeters, but if I decided I wanted to have 10.5 millimeters, I would need to have it at least set to 0.0. The 0.0 on the other side would represent that 0.5 millimeters, so it would be 10.5. If I had just left it at 0, it will probably round the number up to 11, which is not ideal. So generally I find for the sort of drafting work I do with architectural sort of drafting, that the two decimal places afterwards is generally more than enough for what I require. As you can see, it goes up quite high. That would be probably suitable for certain industries that have very minute tolerances. Now just below here we have this other part here that says insertion scale. That's not to do so much with our drawing that we're currently in. What that's to do with is when we insert perhaps another drawing or another object into our drawing, it says what this scale will be when it comes in. Seeing I'm working with millimeters, I'll keep it on millimeters, but as you can see there's many different measurements systems in there. I'll show you how that works. So for instance, if I just leave all this the way we've got now and just click the OK button. Now if I want to insert a block, I'm going to use my own menu here just to save time, and I'm going to insert a block of a vehicle. So we'll place that in there. Now if I use a command to work out the distance just by pressing the letter D, or you can type DIST for dist, and I'll just click on one side of the car to the other, and in the bottom here of the command prompt you can see that the measurement here is 4310.70. That 4310, because we're working in millimeters, is equivalent to 4.3 meters, which is about right for a vehicle. Now if we go back to our units window, we can just type units, or UN for short. Now if I was to change this to say inches, click OK, and then I'll insert another vehicle, or perhaps I'll grab the side view this time, and as you can see it's come in, but it's come in at a much smaller scale because it's trying to understand this measurement as inches rather than what it was originally drawn in, which is millimeters. So we'll go back to UN and we'll change that back to the millimeters, and then we can perhaps insert something else again, perhaps this vehicle, and as you can see it's obviously a bigger vehicle, but it's within the right scale. So that's basically how the units works in terms of this. As you can see, it says insert to scale, the units to scale inserted content, which is what we were doing. Now over here we have the angle. I always work in decimal degrees, so that would just be, for instance, 35 degrees. There are obviously other things here, gradients and radians. I've never had the need for those particular measurements for the type of work that I do. There's also surveyor units, which may be relevant if you're in that industry. And as you can see, degrees, minutes, seconds. You don't necessarily need to set that to be able to use that method either. I'll show you later on when we set up a site plan and a site boundary how we can do that. Again, we have the position. Well, you could generally leave that on singular or second one. I'll leave it on that 2 decimal place for now. The button below here this says clockwise. That's really got to do with when you're rotating an object. So for instance, if I just click OK, I'll draw myself a line. Now, if I select that line and I want to rotate it, say I want to rotate it 30 degrees. Now see, it's rotated that line down to this line 30 degrees in a clockwise rotation as the clock goes that way. Now if I go back to our units window and I'll untick that, and now I'll rotate the same line, whoops, 30 degrees again. As you can see, it's rotated at the other direction. So basically that's it. It just works out the rotation of the way you're going to rotate things by angles and so forth. Again, this has its place depending on what you're doing. We'll get into that in more detail about the appropriate setting to have depending on what you're doing. And you'll notice at the bottom here too, there is another button called direction. This can get a little bit tricky in here. Again, further on when we do our site title boundary, we'll learn about these settings and the most appropriate to use. So I can just cancel out of that for now. And the bottom here is to do with lighting. It's not really relevant to the sort of work we're going to be doing in this course. This is particularly to do with 3D work when you're doing a 3D rendering and so forth. So it doesn't really matter for our sake what that's set to. So we can click OK. We can see everything's set, and our drawing is now set up and ready for us to work. In this short part of the video, we're just going to look at just basically moving around the AutoCAD model space screen. Basically, the two things that you do to mainly move around the screen to look at things is pan and zoom. As you can see, the little hand that's coming up there right now, that's called panning. And this is zooming out and zooming in. So you'll do a lot of that when you're drawing. To zoom out to see more of the picture, and obviously to pan to move over to the next part of the model space that you want to work on. So to do that, the easiest way in later versions of AutoCAD is using the middle mouse button, basically the scroll wheel. If you hold that down, generally I use my middle finger. If you hold that down, the little hand should come up, and then if you move your mouse left to right, up and down, you should be able to move the screen around. And using the same button, this time instead of pressing it down, we can scroll with our middle finger upways, and we'll zoom out, and then downways to zoom in. So that's pretty much the simplest way to move around the AutoCAD screen. You can use a command to do that too, but ever since Autodesk developed the ability to just be able to use the mouse button in the middle, it made things a lot easier. So yep, give that a try. In this lesson, we're actually going to draw something. We're going to start off using the line command. That's probably the most used command more than anything else. I mean, essentially when you're doing any sort of drafting, that's pretty much what you're doing, is drawing lines. So let's get straight into it and look at what the line command can do. So to start the line command, we're going to use the command prompt. So we can just press the letter L on our keyboard, which you can see in the command prompt, and we'll press the spacebar or enter key, and that'll start the command. And now it asks us for our first point. So we can click anywhere in this black space, our model space window. So I've left clicked there, and now if I move my mouse around, there's a type of rubber band effect happening here from the very first point. Now it's asking me for another point based on the first point. So I can click anywhere I like now. I just click there, and I can move up here and just click around a little bit. Now if you notice in the bottom here at the command prompt, often when you start a command there's sometimes options of doing other things. So say I clicked another point here and I've made a mistake and I didn't want to do that. I may have accidentally clicked the left mouse button. As you can see at the bottom here, there's the command undo. So even though we're in the middle of a command, if I type the letter U and then press the space bar, it'll undo that last line. So we do that again, and then type U, and you can see it's disappeared. You can type U again, disappeared. Type U again, it's disappeared. Type U, disappears, and it will keep on doing that all the way back to the very beginning. The other command you can see in there is the close one. So if I just type the letter C and press space, it closes what we've just drawn here. It's gone back to the original point that we originally started with. So it can be useful. You'll find that's useful for another command in particular. Now you may have noticed that when I select the line, that there's these blue dots on there. What they are called in AutoCAD are grips. In general computer terms, they're referred to as vertices. And what we can do is, if we put our mouse over one of these blue grips and we left click on it, it's now selected, and we can now, just using our mouse, stretch around and then left click somewhere else, and it's now stretched to that point. When we left click one of these grips and it becomes red, it's referred to as a hot grip. It means it's in an edible mode, so we can do something with it. So that's the basics of that. Now you may have noticed that if I start the line command again and move my mouse towards these two lines, a little yellow square comes up, and if I keep my mouse there for a moment, it'll say endpoint. And if I move it between along that line, you'll see a triangle come up called midpoint. These are called snaps, and we can select what we want to do with the types of snaps. There's many different types, and they definitely have a purpose and will make your drawing a lot more accurate. So if we want to look at the snap menu, let's type OS at the command prompt and then press the space bar. And we bring up this window here called drafting settings. Now as you can see, there's all these different shapes. We already saw the square and the triangle, which was endpoint and midpoint, and there's a whole bunch of other ones in there too, which help us to join onto things. These are the ones that I mainly have selected. The endpoint and midpoint is basically you'll snap automatically to the end of a line or to the midpoint of a line. Center's really to do with snapping to arcs and circles, ellipses, sort of more curved shapes. We'll look at that a bit later. We'll look at nodes in a bit more detail later too. Basically they're points, just a little single dot which you can snap to. Quadrants, again, for more curved shape type things, such as circles and arcs. We'll look at intersection as well a bit further on. Extensions, it projects an invisible line to where two things might extend. We'll look at that again in detail later on. The insertion one is to do with another thing we'll look at later, particularly to do with blocks and things that have an insertion point. Perpendicular is pretty much well, just that, perpendicular. Well, what we'll do is we'll have a look at that. That's selected. We'll click OK. Let's draw a line. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to draw a straight line. So as you can see at the moment, if I move my mouse in any direction, it's just sort of going off any direction. Now, if I press the F8 key on my keyboard, it now makes it so whichever way I put my mouse, it'll only go up, down, or left or right. So we'll just click over here. Now if I just click a line up here and come straight down, you can see that the perpendiculars come straight up as a point there. So it's going to snap exactly perpendicular to that line that we're trying to connect to. That's the perpendicular snap. Now, in terms of working out the length of a line that we want, if I just start the line command again, L and then spacebar, was click a point here. You can see as I move my mouse to the right, numbers keep going up, and we're in millimeters, so at the moment it says 3,415, which is in millimeters. Now we want to do that more accurately. We might want to make that 3 meters. So just by typing the number 3000 at command prompt and then pressing space in the direction where we want the 3 meters to go, we now have a 3 meter line. We can measure that in two ways, just to check. We can use the dist command, D-I-S-T, which is to measure distances, and then press space. And as you can see, we're snapping using the endpoint to the end of that line, and we're going to snap to the end of the line the other side. And if we look at the command prompt, it now tells us what our distance was, which was 3000, which is what we wanted it to be. Another way to check line distance is if we look at our properties window, which should be open if you followed the earlier tutorial. If not, just hold down your control key on your keyboard and press the number 1. Now if we go over to our properties window and we look towards the bottom under the geometry category, you'll see the number 3000. That's the total length of the line. So that's the basic parts of what we can do with a line. We'll get into changing the colors and different line styles a little later on, but that's the basics of the line. Just before I finish up with this tutorial, there's something I failed to mention towards the beginning, is that once we start the line command, so we'll just start that now, the L button and then spacebar, pick a point with the left mouse button. If we start drawing around, just clicking around, I didn't say how we actually end the command. So there's two ways to do that in the line command. We can either just press the space key, which just finishes the command, or what we could do is, and this works for every single command, is if you press the escape key, that'll end the command. Some commands may require you to press the escape key at least twice to end the command completely, but for the line, the escape keys, just pressing it once is enough. The other thing too that I didn't mention was the quick way to turn the snapping onto the various lines on and off. As you can see, we're snapping here, is I can just press the F3 key on my keyboard, and as you can see now, it's not snapping to anything. That's turned it off, and that can be very useful because sometimes you might want to try and get to a certain line without it snapping onto something. So I press the F3 key again, and you can see it's wanting to snap to things, so which we can just click on. Okay. There are some other things that we can do with the line command, which we'll look at a little further on. This is the basics of it. So as I've said before, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you. In this video, we're going to look at some more of the curve type shapes that we can use in AutoCAD. As you can see in my model space window here, this first shape I have, this is referred to as an arc. And our second shape here is clearly a circle, and the one at the end here is what we call a spline. Now the first thing we'll look at is the arc. The arc is pretty much a portion of a circle. As you can see, if I move this over to the circle here and drag these scripts down to the edges, you can see that it perfectly lines up and matches over the circle. So an arc is essentially that, a portion of a circle. I'll show you how we can use it in a moment, but up here I have a door, what we'd see in floor plan, where you can see that we've used an arc, so that's a good use of the arc. We can also do the same thing with a circle, which we can look at in a later video. Right now we'll look at the arc command. So to start the arc command, we'll type A on our keyboard, as you can see in the command prompt at the bottom, and then we'll click space or enter to start the command. Now as you can see at the bottom here, it's the arc command started, and now it's asking us for a start point. Now we can just go up to the model space here and click anywhere. So we'll left click our mouse, and as you can see, as I move my mouse around, it's wanting to sort of follow to the next point. If you have Ortho on, it won't make any difference. It'll just sort of band around. Okay, so now it's asking us for a second point. So we can just click up here. The second point, by the way, will be the middle of the arc. And as you can see, if I drag my mouse around, it's now asking me for the end point, which I can then click. So there's our basic arc. Okay. If we start that command again, arc, and we'll click somewhere again on the model space, and this time if you look at the command prompt, we can click on center or end. Now we can either, depending on the version of AutoCAD, either click on either one of those commands, or if you don't have that function, depending on the version you have of AutoCAD, you can just select the letter, the first letter, which is for end would be E, and then press the space or enter key. And now it's asking us for the end of the arc instead of a second point. So we just click perhaps anywhere you like. I just clicked on that other arc we already had there. And as you can see now, if I move my mouse around, it's sort of trying to create a shape. I don't find that's particularly useful. So again, if we look at the command prompt, we have three selections here of how we want to pretty much end this arc. The most common one I use is direction. So if I type the letter D and then space or enter, now as you can see, if I move my mouse around, it's sort of locking now into places. That's because I also have my Ortho on. If you don't have Ortho on, press the F8 key to turn it on. So if I turn off Ortho, you can see that it's not really snapping to anything, but as soon as I press the F8 key, it's now snapping to things. So based on the direction of your mouse, depends on how that's going to, the shape's going to form. So if I'm happy with the shape where I've got it now, I can just left click my mouse, and now we have an arc. If we go back to our door, we can see that working. So we'll start the arc command again, so A, and ask for our first point. So we'll click here on the door jamb, and again we'll go down the command prompt and we can see end. We'll click on E for end, and then we can click on the end of our door. And as you can see again, it's just moving around, so that's no good. So we go back to the command prompt and we see direction, so we can click D or press D on a keyboard and press space or enter. And as you can see, if I move my mouse around, it gives me a few different shapes, and that looks pretty good to me up there. So I just click the left mouse button, and now we have an arc which perfectly fits our doorway. Okay, that's the basics of the arc. There are a few other things you can do with it, but I think you'll tend to find that those few things we've looked at so far is a good starting place for using the arc. The next command we're going to look at is the circle. So to start the circle, you just type C on your keyboard and press space or enter. Again, it's now going to ask us for the center point of the circle. So we'll click anywhere on our model space, and as soon as we click it and start moving our mouse outwards or inwards, you can see that the circle moves with the mouse. Now that can be useful if you already have perhaps some lines which you just want to snap to, which you can do. So if I move this up to this other circle, you can see that it wants to snap onto there. So if I left click there, we have our circle formed. Sometimes we don't have something to snap onto and we want a specific radius or diameter of a circle. So let's start the circle command again, and we'll left click anywhere in model space. Now we look down here in the command prompt. It's asking us now to specify the radius of the circle. So by default at the moment, based on the last circle we created, it's got the last number. Now we may want that to be perhaps a radius of 500. So we could just type in 500 on our keyboard and press space or enter, and now it's created a circle with a radius of 500. Now if we go back to that command once again, create another circle, left click model space, and if we go look at the bottom of our command prompt, we can see that by default it's asking us for a radius, but we can also select by diameter. So to do that, we can press the D key and then space or enter, and now it's going to ask us to specify the diameter of the circle. And as you'll notice, every time you restart the command, if you've already drawn a circle, it's going to default back to the last number we used. If we look at the command prompt, the last figure we used for the radius was 500, and now we've pressed the D key to do the diameter. It's automatically put in 1000, which is basically two radiuses of 500 equals 1000 diameter. So we can change the diameter if we like to 800, and then we have our circle diameter of 800. A thing we can also do on our properties window over here on the left, if your property windows is not up, press the control key and hold it down and press the number 1 on your keyboard. We can change the diameter here if we like, or the radius, to change that circle. So if I change that to 600, you can see the circle's changed in shape and also the diameter automatically updated. Now that's the basics of the circle. There are again a few other things you can do, but for now I think we'll just look at those, that basic sort of start to how to create one. Now our last shape we're going to look at is called the spline, and as you can see, it's we've got a bit of a wavy line here. A spline allows us to draw a continuous curved line, so we can create any shape we like, rather than basically having to create a whole bunch of lines and arcs and that separately to create a shape like that, which would be a lot more time consuming. Once we start the spline command, it'll just keep asking us for a point until we end the command. So to start the spline command, we type SPL at the command prompt, press enter or space, and it's going to ask us for our first point. So let's just click anywhere on model space. Now I have my ortho turned on, as you can see by the way I'm moving my mouse. It's just locking to those positions. So generally when you use the spline command, you'll find that you want to have the ortho off, so you have more control over the shape. So now as you can see, I've turned ortho off by pressing the F8 key on my keyboard. Now it's asking me for another point, so if I just click there, and now if you see as I move my mouse around, the line is sort of bending around to follow my mouse, and if I click a bit closer, I'm sort of creating more of a rounded shape, and I can just keep clicking, as you can see, and we're creating sort of a big curved shape. You might be wondering why you'd use such a command as the spline, especially if you're doing something perhaps with building work where things generally are a bit more linear. Well, this can be used in many areas. Very useful for a simple thing would be like a landscape plan, where we would have perhaps some grassed areas that have a certain sort of curved shape, or a garden bed. It can also be useful for drawing in elevation, perhaps organic shapes like a tree or a bush or something like that you wanted to put into your drawing. There is many purposes where you'll find that using a command like this can be very useful. We'll probably look at this further on down the track in the course where we can use this. It's also very good for tracing other images that we can use later in our drawings. Again, we'll look at that a little bit later. So these are the basic sort of curve shapes that we can use in AutoCAD. As I said, we'll look more in detail later in the exercises on how to apply these in a practical sense. So you could give that a try if you like now, and if you have any comments or questions, please ask them in the comments. In this lesson, the last command we're going to look at for drawing is called the polyline. A polyline is basically the same as a line, but when you're drawing a series of lines, they're all connected together using a polyline, and a polyline can even connect arcs to it. This can be very useful in many areas. We'll get into that, but we'll start the command first. So to start the polyline command, we can type PL at our command prompt, press space or enter. Now it asks us for a start point, so click anywhere on your model space. Now, as you can see, I've currently got my Ortho turned off, so I'm going to press my F8 key to turn it on. Okay. Now, a bit like the line command, depending on which way we move the mouse, is the way that the line is going to go, whether we either click that direction or move our mouse in that direction and type a distance. So I'm going to move my mouse to the right, and I'm going to type 3000 and press enter. And as you can see, it's drawn a line. Now, if I now just click perhaps upwards of the screen, well, I can either click or enter a distance. Well, I'll enter a distance. We'll put 2500. Now, I'm going to end the command by pressing the space bar. Now, if I just select the polyline with my mouse left clicking on it, you can see it's selected both those lines together, and they're joined together. So that's the difference between a line and a polyline. If I was to just draw a few more lines, just clicking around using the polyline command and enter to stop the command, select it, and as you can see, I've selected the whole shape. If I was to do that just with using the line command, L at the command prompt, and do a similar thing just using line, and press enter in the command, if I just press or select that one line, as you can see, it's separated, and so that's the difference. Now, there's a few things we can do with the polyline. If I select the polyline and then look over in my properties window on my left hand side of my screen to bring it up, if it's not up already, hold down the control key and press the number 1 on your keyboard. You can see that there's a few different options down here, and what we can do is we can give the polyline a thickness. So if I wrote 50 in the global width and pressed enter, you can see that the line on the screen is now has a thickness. We can do line thicknesses in other ways, which we'll look at further on. This is just one method of making the line a specific thickness, if that's what you require. It's good because it's immediate and visual, so you can see exactly how thick that line is. To set that back to nothing, we can just put 0 under global width, press the space button. As you can see here, we have elevation. We won't worry about that right now. That's more of a thing to do with more 3D work, I find, more than anything else. Now we scroll out a little bit. You can see also in this window here under miscellaneous, it says closed, no. If I was to left click and select yes, you can see now that a line has formed automatically. So with that no, you can see the line's gone, and yes, the line's back again. That's called a closed polyline. when that's selected. The good thing about a closed polyline, if we now select that closed polyline, if you look in the properties box again, it now gives us the area of that polyline, which is very useful for working at floor areas. As you can see here, the numbers are, well, the number is quite high. That's in millimeters. We'll look at that later in a further lesson about converting that number to something that's a little bit more user-friendly. Okay, and if you see, if I left-click on one of these grips to make it a hot grip, so it's red, and move my mouse around, I can drag that and then left-click, and as you can see, it's also then updated the area. So you can just do that on any point that you like, and we can just form the shape. So doing that. Another thing we can do if we wanted to create a closed polyline with curves is we can use arcs in the middle of the command. So if we type the PL of the command prompt to start the polyline command, press enter or space, we'll click our start point. We'll just perhaps click a little bit to the right here, and maybe up one more. Now, if we look down here in the command prompt, there are some other things we can do here. What we're going to be looking at this time around is the arc. So we're in the middle of our polyline command, so if we type the letter A for arc, it's now going to ask us to basically click another point to finish the arc. We could just click here and it'll continue in the arc command. The thing that's good about the arc command, it's in polyline, is it's exactly the same as the arc command when you just use arc itself. So if we look down here again in the middle of this arc command inside the polyline, we can type the letter S for second point and click that, and now it's going to ask us for a second point of the arc, which I've just clicked on. I can also type the letter U to undo that. Actually, sorry, no, you can't. We'll just left click here, just looking for an endpoint, then we can undo that, sorry. Okay, so we'll do that again. We'll look at we're in the middle of the polyline command and we're in the arc mode. Type S for second point. Ask us for a second point. So perhaps we'll just click on here, and now it's going to ask us for an endpoint. So we can click anywhere we like. We might just want to click there. And as you can see, it's all joined up to itself. We'll just delete that. Okay, so we'll start the polyline command again. We'll draw some lines, turn the ortho back on. And if we type A again for arc, and perhaps we would just like to just click anywhere this time. I turned off ortho again, so I had more control then with my arc. If I turn ortho back on, you can see it sort of limits. So I've just turned it off for a moment. So I've created an arc, and I can keep creating those arcs. Now, if you wanted to go back to now drawing a line, if we look back at the command prompt, there's the line command is there. So all we have to do is type the letter L at the command prompt, and we'll be back to the line command. So now we can go back to clicking lines. And if you wanted more linear lines, we can press F8 key to turn ortho back on. Okay, now if you look up here, this is the beginning of our polyline where we began. So we can either click on that, left click on that, or if you look at the command prompt again, there's the close command there. So we can type the letter C and then press space or enter, and as you can see, it's now closed the whole polyline. And as you can see also in the properties again, the area's there, and we can still move this around as we would like. It's a great tool for not just areas, but also hatch patterns, which we'll look at later. Sometimes it can be troublesome getting AutoCAD to create what we call a hatch pattern, and a polyline can be very helpful in those instances. Another thing we can do too is turn real lines, just the average line. So we start the line command, just L on our keyboard, and we'll see we've just creating some lines here. And as you can see, I'll just click them separately as just a separate line. We can turn normal lines into polylines too, if we want to. To do that, we can type PE for polyline edit, or P-edit, at the command prompt, press space or enter. Now it's going to ask us to select polyline, and we selected our line, and it's now telling us that this is basically not a polyline, so would we like to turn it into one? And we can type Y on our keyboard and then press spacebar or enter. And we can either press spacebar or enter again to get out of the command, which we've just done, and if we select on that and then look at our properties window, we can now see that that's a polyline. Okay. Another thing we can do is we can join multiple lines together in one go. So we'll type the PE command again. We'll select the other line and ask us again, do we want to turn it into one? We can say yes. Now this time if we look at the command prompt, there's a few different commands there. If we select join, so type J at the command prompt, press enter or space, it's going to ask us other objects to join. So we'll select the other two lines. Now they're all selected, we can press the space bar or enter key, and we can press that once more, and now we select that, they're all joined together. So we can also join polylines that are separated together by using the same command. So PE, and we'll select our polyline, and we can just do the join command again. So J command prompt, space or enter, and select the line, and space one more time to end the command. And as you can see, they are all joined now. Another thing we'll just look at with this other polyline we created over here, if we look in our properties window, we can see that it's currently under closed. It says yes. If we select no, you can see that it's now deleted one of the lines. So it seems to delete the last line that you either drew or the one that it sort of puts in automatically. So we'll just select on yes. That's an important thing to be aware of too, that sometimes to do certain things the polyline must be closed. Certainly it needs to be closed if you want areas. If we just select on this polyline here, as you can see it's not closed, it's really not going to give us sort of any accurate information about what the area is, as there's no enclosed space. So that's the basics of the polyline command. We'll be using that a bit throughout our project, and we'll learn more about it then. If you have any comments or questions about it, please leave them in the comments below.